The snowstorm had been raging for 3 days now. Sarah could no longer feel her extremities as she trudged through the knee-deep snow, each step more laborious than the last. Her pale blue skin had taken on a dangerous purple hue at the fingertips and around her silver eyes, signs of hypothermia setting in. The abandoned lower sectors of what was once a thriving metropolis offered little shelter, with most buildings either collapsed or sealed off by the authorities. Sector 9K was the forgotten underbelly of New Aurora City. Once, it had housed thriving communities, but that was before the Great Elevation, the massive engineering project that had literally raised the wealthy district skyward on massive pylons, leaving the lower sectors to decay in perpetual shadow. From below, the citizens of 9K could see the gleaming lights and floating gardens of Upper Aurora, tantalizingly close yet impossibly far away. Sarah pulled her tattered coat tighter around her slender frame. The garment, designed for human proportions, hung awkwardly on her tall, willowy body. Her white hair, naturally luminescent among her species, had lost its glow, now matted with ice and grime. 6 months ago, she had arrived on Earth with a small group of refugees fleeing the destruction of their home planet. They had been promised sanctuary, safety, and a chance at a new life. Those promises had dissolved faster than snowflakes on warm skin. Alien Regulation Act, they had called it. A series of increasingly restrictive laws designed to control, contain, and eventually expel non-human refugees. Her group had been separated, processed, and most deported to off-world detention facilities. Sarah had escaped during transport, fleeing into the abandoned sectors where even the surveillance drones rarely ventured. She approached another door, the 17th she had tried today. This one belonged to a partially collapsed apartment complex that still showed signs of habitation. A faint light visible through frost-covered windows, the absence of snow at the doorstep. Sarah raised a trembling hand and knocked 3 times, trying to summon strength to her voice. "Please," she called, her accent making the human language sound melodic despite her desperation. "Please, I seek shelter from the storm. I require warmth only. I will depart when—" The door jerked open just enough for a man to peer through the crack, his face contorted with disgust and fear. "No aliens," he spat, his breath forming angry clouds in the frigid air. "You bring trouble. Government watching you lot. Get away from my door before they see you here." "I am alone," Sarah pleaded. "No one follows." "That's what you all say," the man snarled. "Then the patrols come breaking down doors. I got kids in here. Get lost before I call enforcement." The door slammed shut with such force that icicles dropped from the eaves, shattering at Sarah's feet. She stood motionless for several moments, summoning the will to keep moving. Her body was beginning to shut down. She knew the signs well enough. Without shelter in the next hour, she would not survive the night. With faltering steps, she moved down the street, scanning desperately for any sign of potential haven. At the end of the block stood a small, dilapidated house, set back from the others. Unlike the apartment buildings, it appeared to be a relic from before the Great Elevation. A single-family dwelling with a sloped roof, now heavy with snow. A faint orange glow emanated from its windows, suggesting a real fire rather than electric heat. The 18th door. Her last hope. Sarah gathered her remaining strength and approached, noting with surprise that the path to the door had been recently cleared of snow. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles made contact, the door swung inward. A man stood there, human, tall and broad-shouldered, with unkempt dark hair streaked with premature gray. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his eyes suggesting either age beyond his years or hardships that had marked him prematurely. He wore simple, practical clothing, thermal layers, and heavy work pants. His expression registered surprise, then wariness, as he took in Sarah's alien features. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I will die in this cold." The man's eyes flicked past her to scan the street, then up to the sky where patrol drones occasionally buzzed by. His jaw tightened as he appeared to wage some internal battle. Then, without a word, he stepped aside. "Quickly," he said, his voice low and rough, as if unused to speaking. "Get inside before someone sees." Sarah didn't hesitate. She stumbled across the threshold, the sudden warmth of the house sending painful, tingling sensations through her frozen extremities. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the man slid a heavy bolt into place. "Thank you," Sarah managed to say before her legs gave way beneath her. She would have crashed to the floor had the man not caught her, his strong hands gripping her shoulders. "You're in advanced hypothermia," he observed, his tone clinical yet concerned. "Can your species tolerate rapid warming?" Sarah nodded weakly. Not unlike humans in this regard." "Good. I got a fire going. Cool me." He half-carried her to a worn armchair positioned directly in front of an old-fashioned wood-burning stove. The heat emanating from it was intense, almost painful against Sarah's frozen skin, but she welcomed the discomfort. It meant she would live. The man disappeared into another room, returning moments later with several thick blankets and a steaming mug. He wrapped the blankets around her, then pressed the mug into her trembling hands. "Drink," he instructed. "It's just tea with sugar. Should help with your core temperature." Sarah took a cautious sip. The liquid was bitter yet sweet, and blessedly warm as it traveled down her throat. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier now. "You have saved my life." The man shrugged, pulling up a wooden chair to sit across from her. "Don't thank me yet. I'm probably condemning us both." He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "I'm Gideon." "I am Srahil," she replied, then corrected herself with a human pronunciation. "Sarah." Gideon nodded, then fell silent, watching her as she slowly sipped the tea and absorbed the blessed heat of the fire. Minutes passed, the only sounds the crackling of wood in the stove and the persistent howl of the wind outside. Finally, he spoke again. "How long have you been out there?" 3 days, since the storm began," Sarah answered. "Before that, 2 months living in the ruins of the old hospital in Sector 7J. And before that," Sarah hesitated, eyeing him cautiously. "Does it matter?" "Probably not," Gideon conceded, rising to his feet. "Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stabilized." As he turned to leave the room, Sarah called after him. "Why did you help me?" "The others. 17 doors, all closed to me." Gideon paused in the doorway, his back to her. "I've closed too many doors in my life," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm trying to balance the scales." With that cryptic response, he left her alone with the fire's warmth and her own tumultuous thoughts. Outside, the snowstorm intensified, blanketing Sector 9K in white silence, concealing for the moment the unlikely sanctuary behind the 18th door. The night passed slowly. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, her body gradually recovering from its near-frozen state. Occasionally, she would wake to find Gideon adding logs to the fire or adjusting her blankets. He moved with quiet efficiency, saying little, though his eyes remained watchful and wary. By morning, the worst of the storm had passed, though heavy snow continued to fall. Sarah awoke fully, finding herself stronger, the dangerous numbness in her extremities replaced by the uncomfortable but reassuring pain of circulation returning. She sat up straighter in the chair, observing her surroundings properly for the first time. Gideon's home was small but meticulously organized. The main room contained little furniture beyond the armchair she occupied, his wooden chair, a small table, and shelves lined with books and various tools. More notable than what was present was what was absent. No photos, no decorations, no personal touches. It was the dwelling of someone existing rather than living. A sound drew her attention to the doorway, where Gideon appeared, carrying a tray with a bowl of steaming liquid and what appeared to be bread. "You're awake," he observed. "Good. You should eat something." He set the tray on the small table beside her and returned to his chair. The soup was simple, just broth with some vegetables and unfamiliar protein. But to Sarah, it was the finest meal she'd had in months. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. "Thank you," she said when she had finished. "Your kindness is unexpected." "Don't mention it," Gideon replied, his tone flat. Literally, don't mention it to anyone if you value both our lives. Sarah studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes occasionally darted to the windows despite the thick curtains covering them. You fear retribution for harboring me. I fear retribution for breathing without permission, he said with a hint of dark humor. Harboring an unregistered alien refugee is just a more efficient way to get executed. Then why risk it? Sarah pressed. Why open your door when 17 others remain closed? Gideon was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its hardness. I work for the Bureau of Extraterrestrial Affairs. Immigration Control Division. Sarah tensed immediately, her body instinctively preparing for flight despite her weakness. Not anymore, Gideon added, quickly, noticing her reaction. But for 8 years, I was the one who processed refugee applications, the one who decided who stayed and who was sent back. You were a guardian of gates, Sarah whispered, using her people's term for such officials. That's a more dignified title than we deserved, Gideon said bitterly. We were paper pushers with the power of life and death. And we knew it. I knew it. He stood abruptly, moving to the window and carefully peering past the edge of the curtain. When the Alien Regulation Act passed, everything changed. Before, we at least pretended to evaluate cases on merit. After, it was just about finding reasons to deny, meeting deportation quotas. He turned back to face her. I had approved a family the day before the act passed. A mother and 3 children. They would have been granted sanctuary under the old rules, but the new administration demanded a review. Sarah saw pain etched in the lines of his face. I was ordered to reverse my decision, to flag them for immediate deportation. Gideon's voice grew heavy. I knew what that meant. The detention facilities are not designed for survival, especially for species like yours that require specific environmental conditions. Did you comply? Sarah asked quietly. Yes. The word hung in the air, laden with regret. Yes, I did. And not just for that family. For hundreds more over the next year. I told myself I was just following orders, that someone else would do it if I didn't. All the usual excuses. He returned to his chair, shoulders slumped. Then one day, I was handed a deportation order for a child. Just a child, separated from her parents during the chaos of arrival. 10 years old in human equivalents. And I signed it. Sarah remained silent, sensing there was more to come. 3 days later, I received word she had died in transport. Environmental system failure, they said. Just an unfortunate incident. Gideon's hands clenched into fists. That night, I walked out of my office and never went back. Abandoned my upper city apartment, my credentials, my entire life. Came down here where no one asks questions and government eyes rarely look. You have been hiding, Sarah observed. Hiding, surviving, atoning, if such a thing is possible. Gideon looked directly at her. So, when I saw you at my door, half dead from the cold, having been rejected 17 times, I couldn't bring myself to make it 18. Especially not after what I've done. The confession hung in the air between them, a bridge of sorts, built from the painful honesty of a man haunted by his past. After a long silence, Sarah spoke. My family. We were separated during processing. My life mate and our daughter. Her voice faltered. I do not know if they were deported or if they remain in detention. I escaped during transfer between facilities. The guards were less than vigilant with one they believed too weak to flee. When was this? Gideon asked. 6 lunar cycles ago. I have been in the lower sectors since, moving when necessary, hiding from patrols, scavenging what I could. Gideon nodded slowly. The system is designed to break people, humans and non-humans alike, to make existence so difficult that self-deportation seems preferable. Yet we persist, Sarah said, a flicker of defiance lighting her silver eyes. My people have a saying, even in the void between stars, hope finds purchase. A ghost of a smile touched Gideon's lips. Poetic. Practical, Sarah corrected. Hope is not mere sentiment. It is a survival mechanism. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden mechanical buzzing overhead. Gideon stiffened, rising quickly to extinguish the lamp near the window. "Patrol drone," he whispered, motioning for Sarah to remain absolutely still. "Standard sweep pattern. Should pass in a minute." They waited in tense silence as the buzzing grew louder, then gradually faded. Only when it had disappeared entirely did Gideon relax slightly. "We're relatively safe here," he said, reigniting the lamp. "This house doesn't appear on most current maps. A clerical error I've been careful to maintain. But we still need to be cautious." "I should leave when the storm passes," Sarah said, though the thought of returning to the freezing streets filled her with dread. "My presence endangers you." "And where would you go?" Gideon challenged. "Back to the hospital ruins? Another abandoned building?" "The storm isn't expected to let up for at least another week. And even after that, the temperature will remain well below what your physiology can handle without proper shelter." "I've survived this long." "Survived, not lived." Gideon shook his head. "Stay, at least until the worst of winter passes. I have supplies enough for 2, and an extra room that's going unused." Sarah regarded him with cautious hope. "Why would you take such a risk for a stranger?" "Because I'm tired of being part of the problem," Gideon said simply, "and because, not too long ago, I was the stranger that no one would help." A week passed then, too. The snowstorm continued with brief interludes of eerie calm before returning with renewed fury. Sarah regained her strength gradually, the blue luminescence returning to her skin, her white hair regaining some of its natural glow. Gideon proved to be a quiet but not unfriendly host, giving her space while ensuring she had everything needed for recovery. They fell into an unexpected rhythm. During the days, Gideon would teach Sarah about surviving in the lower sectors, which areas to avoid, how to evade patrol drones, where to find supplies. In return, Sarah shared knowledge of her own, star navigation techniques, methods for purifying water that required no equipment, stories of her homeworld that would never be recorded in any Earth archive. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing comfortable silence. "How did you learn to trust humans again?" Gideon asked one night as they shared a meager but warm dinner. "After everything that was done to you and your people?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I have not learned to trust humans as a whole," she admitted. "But I have learned to trust you, Gideon. There is a difference." "Is there?" "I'm no better than those who shut their doors. I just opened mine too late to make a real difference." "That is not true," Sarah said firmly. "You speak as though redemption is a destination one reaches. For my people, it is a path one walks. Every step matters." Gideon seemed about to respond when a sound outside caught their attention. Not the familiar buzz of a patrol drone, but something else. Human voices. "Quiet," Gideon whispered, quickly moving to extinguish the lights. He crept to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain as he peered out. "There are people outside." 3. No, 4 of them. Sarah joined him at the window, her superior night vision allowing her to see clearly into the darkness. A small group huddled in the shadow of a collapsed wall across the street. Even from this distance, she could see that 2 were not human, their proportions and movements betraying their extraterrestrial origins. "Refugees," she whispered. "2 of my kind, 2 humans. They appear injured." One of the figures suddenly collapsed into the snow. The others gathered around in obvious distress. "They will not survive the night in this cold," Sarah said, turning to Gideon with urgent eyes. "The young one who fell, her body temperature is already critically low. I can see the dimming of her luminescence." Gideon's face was a mask of conflicted emotions. "If we help them, we risk exposure. For more people means 4 times the chance of discovery. If we do not help them, they will die," Sarah countered. "Just as I would have died had you not opened your door." For a long moment, Gideon remained frozen in indecision. Then, with a resigned sigh, he moved to the door. "Stay inside. I'll bring them in." "I will come with you," Sarah insisted. "They will trust me more readily." Together, they ventured into the biting cold. The snow was falling heavily again, nearly obscuring their vision as they crossed the street. The group of refugees recoiled as they approached, the 2 aliens pushing the humans behind them in a protective gesture. "We mean no harm," Sarah called in her native tongue, causing the aliens to start in surprise. She switched to English for the humans' benefit. My friend and I offer shelter from the storm. One of the aliens, a male with deep indigo skin, stepped forward cautiously. Why would you help us? Are you with the authorities? If we were with the authorities, you would already be in restraints, Gideon said bluntly. We're offering you a warm place to stay and possibly food, not a trap. But we need to move quickly before a patrol spots us, all standing out here like idiots. The four refugees exchanged wary glances, but the condition of their collapsed companion left them little choice. The younger alien female, barely more than a child, lay trembling in the snow, her skin a dangerous shade of violet. We accept your offer, the indigo-skinned alien finally said. Gideon and Sarah helped them carry the semi-conscious young female across the street and into the house. Once inside, they laid her near the stove, where Sarah immediately began examining her. Her core temperature is dangerously low, Sarah reported. Similar to the condition I was in when you found me, but more advanced. She needs warming immediately. As Sarah tended to the young alien, Gideon assessed the other refugees. The two humans, a middle-aged woman with a hardened expression and a younger man barely out of his teens, bore the gaunt, haunted look of those who had been living rough for too long. The indigo-skinned alien male watched Sarah's ministrations with obvious concern. She is your offspring? Sarah asked him. Gently. My sister's child, he confirmed. Valnia is her name. Our family was separated during processing. We found each other by chance 2 cycles ago. And you, Gideon addressed the humans. What's your story? The woman regarded him with suspicion. Does it matter? We're all fugitives here. It matters if you're going to stay under my roof, Gideon replied firmly. I need to know what risks you bring. The younger man placed a restraining hand on the woman's arm. Bren, he's right. They deserve to know. He turned to Gideon. I'm Core. This is Bren. We worked at Detention Center 5 until we disagreed with operations there. They were killing aliens, Bren said bluntly. Not directly. They're too clever for that. They were adjusting environmental controls, accidentally mixing incompatible species in holding cells, forgetting dietary requirements, then logging the deaths as natural causes or pre-existing conditions. We helped a group escape, Core continued. Got caught in the act. Been on the run ever since, trying to reach the boundary lands in the north. Gideon's expression darkened. I know the methodology well. I used to work for the Bureau. The tension in the room instantly escalated. The indigo alien stepped protectively in front of his niece, while Bren's hand moved to what was likely a concealed weapon. Ex-bureau Gideon clarifique. I left when I could no longer stomach what we were doing. Now I'm as much a fugitive as any of you. Gideon opened his door when 17 others refused, Sarah added, not looking up from tending to Valnia. He saved my life, as we are now trying to save Alenia's. His past actions do not define his present intentions. The standoff gradually eased, though wariness remained. As Sarah continued to care for the young alien, Gideon distributed what supplies he could spare, blankets, dry clothing, and modest portions of food. The refugees accepted these offerings with a mixture of gratitude and lingering suspicion. You can stay until the storm passes, Gideon told them. After that, we'll need to discuss next steps. This house isn't large enough for 6 people long-term, and too many bodies increase the risk of detection. We understand, Core nodded. We don't intend to impose. As the others settled in, finding spaces on the floor to rest, the indigo alien approached Gideon. Up close, his features were aristocratic, with eyes that gleamed like polished onyx. I am Tavrun, he said formally. I wish to express gratitude for your assistance, especially for my niece. No need for formalities, Gideon replied uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. But they did not, Tavrun observed. You did. May I ask your full designation? It is important in my culture to know to whom we owe a life debt. Gideon hesitated. Gideon Reeves. The change in Tavrun's demeanor was immediate and alarming. His posture stiffened, eyes widening in recognition before narrowing dangerously. Enforcement Officer Gideon Reeves? Of the Southern Processing Center. The room fell suddenly silent, all eyes turning toward them. Gideon's expression confirmed Tavrin's question without words. You? Tavrin's voice trembled with barely controlled rage. You rejected my daughter's asylum claim. Sent her to Detention Center 3. She died there. Gideon paled, but did not look away. When? 2 Earth years ago. Her name was Nivea Run. She was 12 years old. A look of horrified recognition crossed Gideon's face. The child, the one separated from her parents during arrival processing. Environmental system failure during transport. So you do remember, Tavrin said, his voice deadly quiet. You remember the life you erased with your signature. Sarah moved between them, addressing Tavrin. Your anger is justified, but this is not the place. It is precisely the place. Tavrin cut her off, his gaze never leaving Gideon. The architect of my family's destruction stands before me, playing at redemption by offering shelter he previously denied to thousands. You're right, Gideon said, his voice hollow. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve redemption. What I did, to your daughter, to countless others, is unforgivable. Then why? Cao Wang demanded. Why this charade of humanity now? It's not a charade, Gideon responded. It's an acknowledgement of what I was, of what I never want to be again. He took a deep breath. I can't bring back your daughter or any of those I condemned with my signatures and stamps. I can't undo the past, but I can try to be better today than I was yesterday. The tension between the two men was palpable, a storm of grief and guilt with no easy resolution. It was Vailnia who broke the silence, her voice weak but clear. Uncle, please, she called from her place by the fire. He is helping us now. That is what matters. Tavrin remained rigid, clearly torn between his thirst for vengeance and his niece's needs. Finally, he stepped back. For Valenia's sake, I will set aside my grievance for now. But this is not finished between us, Gideon Reeves. I wouldn't expect it to be, Gideon acknowledged quietly. The discovery had cast a shadow over the temporary sanctuary, creating invisible but palpable boundaries within the small house. Tavrin kept close to Vailnia, his watchful eyes tracking Gideon's every movement. Bryn and Kor retreated to a corner, conversing in hushed tones. Sarah moved between these fractured groups, attempting to maintain some semblance of cohesion. Late that night, as the others slept fitfully, Sarah found Gideon sitting alone by the dying embers of the fire, his face haunted in the dim glow. You knew, she said softly, settling beside him. When Tavrin mentioned his daughter, you knew immediately who she was. Yes, Gideon admitted. Niviere. I remember her face. I remember all of them, but especially her. She was the breaking. Gideon proved invaluable in organizing the limited resources, ensuring fair distribution and minimal waste. Sarah became a de facto mediator, her calm presence soothing frayed nerves and building bridges between different species. And Gideon, to his own surprise, found himself in the role of leader, a position he neither sought nor felt worthy of, yet could not avoid. His knowledge of government operations, patrol patterns, and identification protocols was essential to keeping them all safe. 3 days after the second group arrived, the storm finally broke. Sunlight, pale and ineffectual, but sunlight nonetheless, broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. With it came a new set of dangers: increased patrol activity, better visibility for surveillance drones, and the need to venture out for additional supplies. We can't all stay here, Gideon announced during their improvised council meeting that evening. It's not sustainable, and it's not safe. We need to disperse to multiple locations, maintain communication, but spread the risk. And go where exactly? Bryn challenged. In case you haven't noticed, safe houses don't exactly advertise. I know of 2 other potential shelters in Sector 8J, Kor offered. Abandoned maintenance stations with functioning climate control. They're not comfortable, but they're off the grid. I know someone who might help, added one of the newer arrivals, a human man named Elias who had been a cargo pilot before helping his alien partner escape detention. An old colleague who runs supply drops to the lower sectors. She might be willing to expand her route. Plans began to form, a fragile network taking shape. Maps were drawn, locations marked, contingencies established. Through it all, Gideon noticed Tavern watching him with an inscrutable expression, neither openly hostile nor remotely friendly. Later, as Gideon was inventorying their dwindling supplies, Tavern approached him directly for the first time since their confrontation. "You are establishing a resistance network," the alien observed without preamble. Gideon glanced up, wary. "I wouldn't call it that. Just trying to help people survive. The distinction is meaningless. Any act of compassion toward my kind is considered resistance by your government." Tavrin's obsidian eyes studied him carefully. "You understand what will happen if you are discovered." "I have a pretty good idea, yes. Yet you proceed anyway." "Why?" Gideon set aside his inventory list, giving Tavrin his full attention. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I've spent too much of my life doing the wrong thing out of fear or indifference or misplaced loyalty. And you believe this. Atones for my daughter's death. No, que deon ser danistri. Nothing atones for that. Nothing ever could. This isn't about balancing scales or clearing my conscience. It's about making different choices now than I made then." Tavrin was silent for a long moment. "On my world, there is a ritual of responsibility. When one has caused irrevocable harm, they bind their fate to those they have harmed. Their lives become tools of restoration, no longer their own." "Sounds like a harsh system." "It is just," Tavrin countered, "and it is what you're doing now, whether you recognize it or not. You have bound your fate to ours. Your life is no longer your own. It belongs to those you have harmed." "I can accept that," Gideon said after a moment's reflection. "I don't expect forgiveness, Tavrin. I don't even want it. What I did was unforgivable. But I hope you'll allow me to help your people now, even if my motives aren't pure enough for your ritual." Tavrin studied him with those unfathomable obsidian eyes. "Motives matter less than actions, Gideon Reeves. For now, we have a common purpose." He extended his hand, a human gesture offered deliberately. "For Vailnia, for the others, I will work alongside you. But I do not forget. I wouldn't want you to," Gideon replied, accepting the offered hand. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning, a tenuous alliance forged from necessity and shared purpose. The relative peace was shattered the following morning when the distinctive whine of enforcement vehicles cut through the quiet. Sarah, who had been keeping watch, rushed to alert the others. 3 patrol units, she reported tersely. "They've stopped 2 blocks east. Officers on foot now, moving door to door." "A sweep?" Gideon asked, immediately moving to secure the shutters. "No," Bryn said, peering cautiously through a crack in the curtains. 2 targeted. Someone must have reported suspicious activity. Panic rippled through the house. The infant began to cry, quickly hushed by its mother. Vailnia, still weak from her ordeal, pressed closer to her uncle. "What do we do?" Cor asked, his young face pale with fear. "If they find us—" "They won't," Gideon interrupted firmly. "Everyone, remain calm and follow the contingency plan. Basement access now." They had prepared for this possibility. Beneath Gideon's house lay a cramped cellar, originally designed as a bomb shelter during an earlier war. He had expanded and reinforced it, creating a hiding place that would shield its occupants from standard detection equipment. It wasn't comfortable, but it was their best chance. As the others filed quickly down the narrow steps, Gideon turned to Sarah. "You should go with them." She shook her head. "They will be suspicious if the house appears completely abandoned. Someone must remain to answer questions." "Then it should be me," Gideon insisted. "I'm human. I have identification, however outdated. I can claim to be a recluse, a scavenger." "I will stay," Sarah said with quiet determination. "If they become suspicious of you, they will run an identity check. Your name will trigger immediate arrest. I, however, am already condemned. One fugitive alien is of little consequence compared to an enforcement officer who betrayed his oath." "Sarah, this is not a debate, Gideon," she cut him off. "Go. Protect the others. I will handle this." Gideon knew she was right, though every instinct rebelled against leaving her to face the patrol alone. "If they take you, I'll find you, he promised. I still have contacts, ways of tracking prisoner transfers. A faint smile touched her lips. I know. Now go. Reluctantly, Gideon descended into the basement, sealing the hidden entrance behind him. In the dimly lit space, 10 pairs of anxious eyes watched him, waiting for reassurance he wasn't sure he could honestly provide. Above, Sarah quickly arranged the main room to appear as though only one person inhabited the house. She pulled her hair back, adjusted her clothing to better conceal her alien features, and positioned herself near the wood stove, feigning the actions of someone simply trying to stay warm on a cold day. The knock, when it came, was loud and authoritative. Lower sector enforcement. Open up. Sarah took a deep breath, then moved to the door, opening it just enough to reveal herself but block view of the room behind her. Yes, she asked, pitching her voice to a higher register, doing her best to suppress her natural accent. 2 officers stood on the doorstep, their uniforms pristine despite the muddy slush surrounding them. The leader, a hard-faced woman with captain's insignia, examined Sarah with suspicious eyes. Routine check, she announced. We've had reports of unregistered individuals in this area. Identification, please. I don't have formal ID, Sarah stammered, playing the role of a frightened lower sector squatter. Lost during the elevation. I've been here since, just trying to survive. The captain's eyes narrowed. Species designation? Sarah hesitated just long enough to seem frightened rather than evasive. Mixed heritage. My grandmother was Centaurian. It was a calculated risk. Quarter aliens were viewed with suspicion but weren't subject to the same harsh regulations as full non-humans. The mixed ancestry would explain her slightly unusual appearance while potentially avoiding immediate arrest. Quarter alien without ID, the captain noted, making an entry on her tablet. That's 2 violations. We'll need to conduct a full scan and property search. Is that really necessary? Sarah protested weakly. I'm just trying to stay warm. I don't bother anyone. Not my concern, the captain replied coldly. Step aside. Sarah had no choice but to comply. As the officers entered, she silently prayed that the basement hiding place would prove as secure as Gideon had claimed. The search was thorough and tense. The officers examined every room, scanned walls for hidden compartments, and checked all identification markers on the appliances and utilities. Sarah stood by, affecting a posture of nervous resignation while tracking their every movement. Multiple food containers, the second officer noted, examining the kitchen. More than one person would need. I stockpile when I can, Sarah explained quickly. Winter's hard down here. The captain activated a handheld scanner, sweeping it around the room. Sarah's heart raced as the device passed over the concealed basement entrance, but it registered nothing unusual. Elevated thermal readings from this area, the captain observed, approaching the wood stove. Recent activity. I keep it burning, Sarah said. Only source of heat. The captain studied her with cold, evaluating eyes. You speak well for a squatter. Education. My mother taught linguistics at the Eastern Academy, Sarah improvised. Before the Registration Act stripped quarter aliens of professional qualifications. Something flickered across the captain's face, perhaps recognition of the injustice, quickly suppressed. Final scan, she announced, producing a more sophisticated device. Blood composition and genetic markers. This was the moment Sarah had dreaded. No amount of deception could disguise her alien physiology from a direct biological scan. As the captain approached with the scanner, Sarah prepared herself for discovery and whatever would follow. The device had barely touched her skin when a tremendous crash resounded from outside, followed by shouts and the squeal of emergency sirens. Captain, a voice called urgently from the doorway. It was a third officer who had remained with their vehicle. Structural collapse on the east perimeter. Multiple civilians trapped. All units ordered to respond. The captain hesitated, clearly torn between completing her inspection and responding to the emergency. We'll continue this later, she finally decided, deactivating the scanner. Provisional clearance only. Expect a follow-up within the week. With that, the officers departed, hurrying toward the commotion several blocks away. Sarah waited until they were well out of sight before rushing to the basement entrance. "It's clear," she called, releasing the hidden latch. "They're gone." The refugees emerged cautiously, relief evident on their faces. Gideon was the last to ascend, his expression a mixture of worry and profound relief when he saw Sarah unharmed. "What happened?" he asked. "We heard a crash." "Building collapse, apparently," Sarah replied. "Convenient timing." "Too convenient," Bren remarked suspiciously. "Those old structures don't just happen to fall at the perfect moment." Core's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Unless someone helped them along." "Elias, your friend with the supply drops, didn't you say she had access to controlled demolition equipment?" Elias looked uncomfortable under the group's sudden scrutiny. "I might have sent an emergency signal when we spotted the patrol vehicles. Can't confirm what actions may have been taken in response." Gideon shook his head, caught between admiration and alarm. "You realize people could have been hurt. Ebanden sector, Elias Chirag. And Maria's careful. She'd have made sure it was clear." "We can debate ethics later," Sarah interjected. "Right now, we have a more immediate problem. The captain issued only provisional clearance. They'll be back with more thorough scanning equipment. Then we need to move," Gideon decided. "All of us. Tonight." The decision was unanimous, though the logistics were daunting. 11 people, many still weakened from exposure and malnutrition, needed to be relocated without detection through patrol-heavy sectors. It would require perfect timing, multiple diversions, and more than a little luck. As they packed what meager supplies could be carried, Gideon found himself working alongside Tavrin, securing warm clothing for Vailnia and the other vulnerable members of their group. "You understand we may not all survive this exodus," Tavrin said quietly. "I know the risks," Gideon acknowledged, his voice equally low. "But staying guarantees capture. At least this way, some will make it to safety." Cao Rei nodded hopefully. "On my world, we have a ceremony before dangerous journeys. A binding of fates. Those who travel together vow to consider each other's survival as important as their own." "Sounds like a good tradition," Gideon replied. "Though I'm not sure everyone here would include me in such a vow." "You would be surprised," Tavrin said. "Actions speak louder than history. Even I can acknowledge that." As night fell, bringing with it another snowfall that would help conceal their movements, the group gathered for a final council. Maps were reviewed, routes confirmed, rendezvous points established. They would travel in 3 smaller groups, less conspicuous, with better chances that some would make it if others were captured. "The maintenance station in Sector 8J is our primary destination," Gideon explained. "Core and Elias will lead the first group, the humans and the infant, who can pass most easily through checkpoints. Bren and Tavrin will take the second group through the service tunnels. Sarah and I will escort Vailnia and provide rearguard." "Why are you and Sarah taking the most dangerous position?" Core questioned. "Because I know enforcement protocols better than anyone," Gideon replied. "And Sarah has superior night vision. We'll have the best chance of spotting patrols before they spot us." The real reason remained unspoken but understood. If capture was inevitable, Gideon and Sarah were offering themselves as the most likely targets, giving the others a better chance to escape. As they prepared to depart, Sarah found a moment alone with Gideon in the small kitchen where, not so long ago, he had offered her that first life-saving cup of tea. "Your house," she said softly. "Your sanctuary. You are leaving it behind." Gideon looked around at the modest space that had been his home and hiding place for nearly 2 years. "It's just walls," he said. "What matters is who we choose to shelter within them." Sarah studied him with those luminous, silver eyes. "When I first came to your door, I was certain I would die. 17 rejections had convinced me that humanity had no compassion left to offer my kind. I'm hardly representative of humanity's best qualities," Gideon said with a self-deprecating smile. "Perhaps not," Sarah acknowledged. "But you showed me something important, that people can change, that doors once closed can open again." She placed her hand gently on his arm. "Whatever happens tonight, remember that you have already succeeded in the most important way." Their moment of connection was interrupted by Bryn's urgent whisper from the front room. Movement outside. We need to move now. The exodus began in tense silence. First Corps and Elias led their group out through the back entrance, disappearing into the swirling snow. 10 minutes later, Bryn's group followed, taking a different route toward the abandoned subway tunnels. Finally, Gideon, Sarah, and Valnia prepared to depart, their path the most exposed, but also the most direct to their destination. As Gideon took one last look at the house that had been his refuge, and then, unexpectedly, a sanctuary for others, he experienced a curious sense of lightness. The burden of his past would never disappear entirely, but it seemed less crushing now, counterbalanced by the simple yet profound act of opening a door when it mattered most. Ready? Sarah asked, supporting Valnia between them. Gideon nodded, pulling the door closed behind him without bothering to lock it. Let's go. They moved through the snow-covered streets like shadows, using the abandoned buildings and drifts as cover. Valnia struggled to keep pace, her weakened condition evident in her labored breathing, but she uttered no complaint. Twice they froze in place as patrol drones buzzed overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Once they were forced to backtrack when they encountered a checkpoint that hadn't been on their maps. They were halfway to their destination when disaster struck. A sudden spotlight blazed down from above, pinning them in its harsh glare. The mechanical voice of an enforcement drone echoed through the empty street. Halt! Identification required. Remain stationary. Gideon pushed Sarah and Valnia toward the shelter of a nearby doorway. Run. I'll distract it. No, Sarah protested. We stay together. The drone descended, weapons systems visibly activating. It was a military-grade model, designed to subdue rather than merely identify, a sign that the earlier search had raised more suspicions than Sarah had realized. Valnia, summoning unexpected strength, pulled free from Sarah's supporting arm. Both of you go, she urged. I will create the distraction. Before either could stop her, Valnia stepped into the open, her hands raised. The luminescence of her skin flared suddenly, bright enough to temporarily blind the drone's optical sensors. It was a defense mechanism of her species, rarely used due to the enormous energy it consumed. Now, Valnia shouted. While it recalibrates, Gideon grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her away from the drone. But Sarah wrenched free, rushing instead toward Valnia, who had collapsed from the effort of her defensive flare. The young alien lay motionless in the snow as the drone's systems began to reset. Help me, Sarah called to Gideon. Together, they lifted Valinia's unconscious form and fled into the maze of ruined buildings, the drone's confused pursuit fading behind them. They emerged on the far side of the block, Valnia a dead weight between them. Her skin had lost all luminescence, a dangerous sign. They needed shelter immediately. There, Gideon nodded toward a half-collapsed storefront. It's not much, but it'll hide us from aerial scans. Inside, they laid Valnia on Gideon's coat and assessed her condition. Her breathing was shallow, pulse weak. She expended too much energy, Sarah explained, her voice tight with worry. The flare is a last resort, meant for dire emergencies. Her core is nearly depleted. What does she need? Gideon asked. Warmth, energy, time to regenerate. Sarah looked around desperately. We need heat, more than our bodies can provide. Gideon surveyed their bleak shelter, bare walls, broken glass, no resources to be found. They had nothing but the clothes on their backs and whatever Gideon carried in his small pack. Wait, he said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. I have something. Wasn't sure if we'd need it, but he produced a small, glowing cube about the size of his palm. Emergency power cell. Standard enforcement issue. I kept it when I left the bureau. Sarah's eyes widened. That could work. Their physiologies can absorb electrical energy in emergencies. Carefully, Gideon activated the power cell and placed it in Valinia's hands. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, gradually, a faint glow began to return to her skin, spreading slowly from her hands to her arms, and eventually her face. It's working, Sarah breathed in relief. Her system is accepting the energy. As Valenia's conditions stabilized, they became aware of increased activity outside. The whine of enforcement vehicles, the mechanical hum of drones, voices barking orders. The drone's alert had triggered a sector-wide search. "We can't stay here," Gideon said, peering cautiously through a broken window. "They're conducting a systematic sweep. It's only a matter of time before they find us." "Valenia can't be moved yet," Sarah replied. "She needs at least an hour to recover enough strength to walk." Gideon's expression grew resolute. "Then I'll lead them away. Create a diversion." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We've discussed this. No sacrificial plays." "It's not sacrifice, it's strategy," Gideon argued. "I can evade them long enough to give you time, then circle back and meet you at the rendezvous point." Sarah studied him, recognizing the determination in his eyes. "You were always going to do this, weren't you? From a moment we planned the escape." Gideon's silence was answer enough. "The scales will never balance, Gideon," Sarah said softly. "No matter how many of us you save." "This isn't about balancing scales anymore," he replied. "It's about choosing what kind of person I want to be now, today. And I choose to be someone who helps others, whatever the cost." Sarah reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Then we go together, when Valenia is strong enough." "Sarah, no more closed doors between us," she insisted. "We face whatever comes as one." Their argument was interrupted by Valenia's weak voice. "They're coming," she whispered, her eyes now open. "I can sense them, 3 blocks away and closing." Gideon checked his meager supplies. "I have one more trick we might try, but it's risky." From his pack, he produced a small metal disc, an enforcement transponder designed to identify officers in the field. "You kept your transponder?" Sarah asked incredulously. "Insurance," Gideon explained. "Never thought I'd use it, but..." He activated the device, which emitted a soft, pulsing glow. "This broadcasts my credentials. Any patrol that detects it will assume I'm on official business. It might give us enough cover to move through the search grid, or it might alert them to exactly who and where you are," Sarah pointed out. "True," Gideon admitted, "but they're going to find us anyway if we stay here. At least this gives us a chance." With Valenia now conscious but still weak, they prepared to venture back into the storm. The young alien insisted she could walk, though she needed Sarah's support. Gideon took point, the transponder held before him like a shield or talisman. They emerged from their temporary shelter into a world transformed by enforcement activity. Searchlights crisscrossed the sky, drones buzzed between buildings, and the distant figures of patrol officers moved methodically through the streets. "Stay close," Gideon murmured. "Move when I move, stop when I stop." Their progress was agonizingly slow, each step calculated to minimize noise, each pause time to avoid detection. The transponder seemed to be working. Twice they froze as patrols passed nearby, only to continue on their way, the officers' attention directed elsewhere by their scanning equipment. They were less than a kilometer from their destination when a spotlight suddenly illuminated them from behind. "Enforcement officer," a mechanized voice announced. "Identify mission and sector authorization." Gideon turned slowly, shielding Sarah and Valenia with his body. A patrol drone hovered at eye level, its sensors trained directly on his transponder. "Special operations," Gideon replied, using the authoritative tone he'd once employed daily. "Prisoner transfer. Classified." The drone processed this information, lights blinking as it cross-referenced his credentials. "Officer Gideon Reeves. Status: decommissioned. Current alert: detain on site." Gideon's gamble had failed. The transponder had identified him, but his status had been flagged in the system. The drone's weapons systems activated with an ominous hum. "Run!" he shouted to Sarah and Valenia. "Now!" But before any of them could move, the drone suddenly sparked and jerked, its lights flickering before going dark. It dropped from air, landing in the snow with a muffled thud. From the shadows of a nearby alley emerged a familiar figure, Tavrun, holding what appeared to be a homemade electromagnetic pulse device. "You are predictable, Gideon Reeves," he said calmly. "I knew you would attempt something foolishly noble." "Tavrun," Sarah gasped. How did you find you? I placed a tracker on Valnia before we separated. He moved to his niece's side, examining her with concern. Her vital signs are improving, but she needs proper care. The others? Gideon asked. Safe at the maintenance station, Tavrin confirmed. But we must hurry. The drones. Signal loss will be noted. Together, they made their way through increasingly narrow backstreets, avoiding the main search grid. Tavrin led them through passages Gideon hadn't known existed, eventually bringing them to what appeared to be a solid wall covered in debris and snow. Here, Tavrin announced, brushing away the camouflage to reveal a maintenance hatch barely large enough for a person to crawl through. This leads directly to the station's lower level. One by one, they squeezed through the narrow opening. Sarah went first, then helped pull Valnia through. Gideon prepared to follow when Tavrin placed a restraining hand on his arm. You knew the transponder would identify you, he said, his tone not accusatory but curious. Yet you activated it anyway. Gideon didn't deny it. It was our best chance. At the cost of your freedom. Perhaps your life. An acceptable exchange. Tavrin's obsidian eyes studied him intently. My people believe that true atonement comes not from punishment, but from transformation. The person who committed the wrong must cease to exist, replaced by one who would never commit such acts again. He gestured toward the waiting hatch. I believe that transformation has already occurred in you, Gideon Reeves. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but in the quiet understanding that passed between them, Gideon found something perhaps more valuable: recognition of change, acknowledgement of growth. He nodded once, a gesture of profound gratitude, before ducking through the hatch into the darkness beyond. The maintenance station was far more spacious than Gideon had anticipated, a sprawling underground complex of chambers and corridors built to service the city's infrastructure during its prime. Core and Elias had done well in selecting it. With multiple levels, emergency power systems, and numerous access points, it provided both security and flexibility. The reunion with the others was subdued but heartfelt. The human mother with the infant wept with relief when she saw they had made it safely. Bryn offered a rare smile, while Core enthusiastically described how they had established communications with other safe houses through Elias's contact network. We've identified 3 more potential refuges, he explained, spreading a hand-drawn map across a makeshift table. And there are rumors of an underground railroad of sorts forming in the eastern sectors, helping people reach the boundary lands. It's happening all across the lower sectors, Elias added. People opening their doors, sharing what little they have. Your house wasn't the only 18th door, Gideon. That night, as the others rested, Sarah found Gideon standing alone in one of the station's observation rooms, a glass-domed chamber that offered a rare, clear view of the night sky between storm systems. You should be resting, she said, coming to stand beside him. Too much on my mind, he replied, gaze fixed on the distant stars. Sarah followed his line of sight. You're looking toward my home system. Is it visible from here? No, she said with a gentle smile. It's far beyond what human eyes can see. But I appreciate the sentiment. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulders nearly touching. What happens now? Gideon finally asked. Now we continue, Sarah replied simply. We help those we can. We build something better than what was. It won't be easy. The government won't stop looking. The winter isn't over. Resources are scarce. True, but we have something more valuable than ease or abundance. She turned to face him directly. We have open doors, Gideon, in a world determined to close and lock them. We have somehow found the courage to keep them open. Gideon considered this, feeling the truth of it settle in his heart. 18, he murmured. What? 18 doors, he clarified. You knocked on 17 that remained closed before finding mine. And now, that 18th door has become... He gestured around them, at the sanctuary they had created, at the community forming within its walls. This, one open door can change everything, Sarah agreed. For one person, or for many. As they stood together beneath the vast expanse of stars, Gideon felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Not the desperate hope of the fugitive seeking merely to survive another day, but the profound hope of someone who has discovered purpose in the midst of chaos. Someone who has found that the simple act of opening a door when others would keep it closed can transform not only lives, but entire worlds. Outside, the storm continued, snow falling silently on the abandoned sectors, covering patrol tracks and refugee footprints alike. But within the sanctuary of the 18th door, no longer a physical space, but an idea, a commitment, a community, warmth prevailed. And in that warmth, something new was taking root, something that could perhaps, in time, grow strong enough to weather even the coldest of storms. 2 months later, the deep winter of Sector 9K began its gradual retreat. The snowstorms grew less frequent, the days incrementally longer. Within the network of safe houses that had expanded from Gideon's original sanctuary, hope flourished alongside pragmatism. What had begun as a desperate effort to survive had evolved into something more structured, more purposeful. Elias's supply contacts had grown into a reliable network, bringing necessities from the upper city to those in hiding below. Bryn and Core had established security protocols that had thus far prevented any further enforcement breaches. Tavrun, with his natural diplomatic abilities, had forged alliances with other refugee groups, strengthening their collective resistance. And Sarah had become the heart of it all. Her calm wisdom and unfailing compassion made her the one to whom all turned for guidance, mediation, and reassurance. Even those initially suspicious of Gideon's past came to trust his judgment when endorsed by Sarah. The maintenance station had been transformed. What was once a sterile industrial space now resembled a small village. Salvage materials created partitioned living quarters. Hydroponic systems, designed originally to maintain the station's oxygen levels, now produced modest but crucial fresh food. A rudimentary medical facility operated under the guidance of one of the newer arrivals, an alien physician named Lorne whose knowledge of comparative physiology proved invaluable. Gideon found himself in an unexpected leadership role, coordinating security and reconnaissance. His knowledge of enforcement procedures and patterns helped keep their growing community one step ahead of the increasingly frequent patrols. The authorities knew something was happening in the lower sectors. They simply couldn't pinpoint where or who was responsible. On this particular evening, Gideon was returning from a scouting mission when he encountered Sarah in the station's eastern corridor. She was emerging from what had become their makeshift school, where she spent several hours each day teaching the children, both human and alien, who had found their way to the sanctuary. "Successful patrol?" she inquired, falling in a step beside him. "Mostly," Gideon replied. "Enforcement presence is increasing in Sector 7J. We'll need to adjust our supply routes." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. Tavrun received a communication from the northern outpost. 3 more families arrived yesterday. "They've heard about us, Gideon. About the 18th door." The name had stuck, becoming a symbol within the underground network. Refugees would ask for the 18th door when seeking sanctuary, never knowing it referred to a specific moment of compassion that had sparked it all. "We're running out of space," Gideon noted, concern evident in his voice. "And resources are stretched thin as it is." "True," Sarah acknowledged. "But Lorne has identified another maintenance station in Sector 10K that could be converted. And Elias has recruited 3 more supply runners from among the sympathizers in the upper city. They reached the observation dome, now serving as their primary meeting area, where several of the community's leaders had gathered. Tavrun and Valnia were there, the young alien now fully recovered and serving as a communication specialist. Core and Bryn stood examining maps, while Elias conversed with 2 new arrivals Gideon didn't recognize. Gideon, Sarah, Tavrun greeted them. "You should hear this." One of the newcomers stepped forward, a human woman with the weathered look of a freight worker. "My name is Alyssa," she introduced herself. "I work the intercity transport lines. For the past month, I've been hearing rumors about what's happening here in the lower sectors." "What kind of rumors?" Gideon asked cautiously. "That people are finding sanctuary." That there's a place where species doesn't matter, where doors open instead of close. Alyssa glanced at her companion, a human man with similar working-class appearance. They're talking about it in the mid-levels now. People who disagree with the government's policies but have been too afraid to speak out. And the authorities? Sarah inquired. What do they know? They know something's happening, the man replied. But they don't understand what. They're looking for a traditional resistance, weapons, planned attacks, political manifestos. They don't comprehend that simply offering shelter, food, and dignity is the most radical act of all. Gideon exchanged a meaningful look with Sarah. It was never meant to be a movement, he said quietly. Just a door that opened when it needed. The simplest acts often have the most profound consequences, Tavrin observed. On my world, there's a saying, a single light illuminates the darkness not by its power, but by its presence. The meeting continued, plans were made, responsibilities assigned. The community would continue to grow, to adapt, to persist. Later, as most retired to their quarters for the night, Gideon found himself once again drawn to the observation dome, seeking the quiet contemplation it offered. He wasn't surprised when Sarah joined him some time later, her quiet footsteps announcing her presence before she appeared at his side. Can't sleep? She asked. Just thinking, Gideon replied. About doors. Sarah smiled. A frequent topic of contemplation for you. I spent years closing them, he said soberly. Stamping papers, following protocols, sealing fates without ever seeing the consequences. Then you appeared at mine, and everything changed. Not just for us, Sarah observed. For hundreds now, perhaps thousands eventually. Gideon turned to face her fully. I never thanked you properly. For what? For knocking on that 18th door. For not giving up after 17 rejections. If you had walked past my house that night. But I didn't, Sarah said gently. And you opened your door. That's all that matters now. She moved closer, her hand finding his in the dim light. Her touch was cool, but profoundly comforting, a reminder of their differences and their connection. There will be challenges ahead, Gideon acknowledged. The government will continue searching. Resources will remain scarce. Winter will return eventually. Yes, Sarah agreed. And we will face them together, door by door, day by day. As they stood beneath the vast sky, among the stars that held both of their worlds, the distance between alien and human seemed insignificant. A constructed boundary no more substantial than the imaginary lines that divided the sectors of their city. What mattered was not the doors that remained closed, but the one that had opened, and all the doors that continued to open in its wake. In the heart of Sector 9K, amid the ruins of a forgotten world, a new one was being born, built not of steel and concrete, but of compassion and courage, of second chances and open doors. It had begun with a simple choice, to see not an alien, but a person in need, not a threat, but a possibility. When the spring finally arrived in full, bringing with it the first genuine warmth Sector 9K had felt in months, the community gathered for a celebration. It wasn't a holiday from any particular culture, but a new tradition they were creating together, a commemoration of survival, of connection, of doors that opened when they needed to. The central chamber of the maintenance station had been transformed for the occasion. Salvaged fabrics in vibrant colors hung from the ceiling. Tables were laden with food, modest by upper city standards, but a feast to those who had known genuine hunger. Children, human and alien alike, darted between the tables, their laughter a testament to resilience. Gideon stood at the periphery, observing the scene with quiet amazement. 6 months ago, he had been alone in his small house, haunted by regrets, existing rather than living. Now he was surrounded by a community that had formed around a single act of compassion. Quite a change from your solitary days, Sarah observed. Approaching with 2 cups of the herbal tea they had learned to brew from native plants. Sometimes I can't believe it's real, Gideon admitted, accepting the offered cup. That all of this grew from one moment, one decision. That's how change always happens, Sarah replied. Not in grand gestures or sweeping revolutions, but in individual choices made at critical moments. Their conversation was interrupted by Valnia, who approached with an air of excitement. Uncle wants you both to join the circle, she said. We're about to begin the ceremony. At the center of the chamber, Tavrin had arranged the community in a great circle. In the middle stood a simple structure, a wooden frame in the shape of a door, standing unsupported, leading nowhere, yet symbolizing everything. Friends, Tavrin began when all had gathered, his resonant voice carrying easily through the space. We come from different worlds, different traditions, different beliefs. Yet we find ourselves united by a common experience, the experience of closed doors and the profound impact of one that opened. He gestured to Gideon and Sarah. 6 months ago, a door opened when it could have remained closed. A simple act that has grown into this community, this sanctuary, this home. The word hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity. Home, something many present had not experienced in years, if ever. In the tradition of my people, Tavrin continued, when a new community forms, we create a symbolic threshold, a door that all may pass through, signifying their commitment to stand together in both abundance and scarcity, in safety and danger. He turned to the wooden door frame. This door has no walls around it, no lock to exclude, no hinges to close. It is permanently, irrevocably open. As we each pass through it, we renew our commitment to keeping our doors, literal and metaphorical, open to those in need. One by one, members of the community stepped through the symbolic doorway. Some moved quickly, others paused in reflection. Children skipped through, while elders stepped deliberately. Each passage was met with soft applause from those who had already crossed and those still waiting. When it came to Gideon's turn, he found himself hesitating, not from reluctance, but from the weight of the moment. He thought of all the doors he had closed in his former life, the files stamped with rejection, the lives altered by his decisions. Then he looked at the faces surrounding him, aliens and humans, adults and children, all watching with expressions of acceptance rather than judgment. He stepped through the frame, feeling a surprising sense of transformation, as if the symbolic act had indeed marked a threshold between his old self and new. Sarah followed, her silver eyes bright with emotion. As she passed through the doorway, she reached back and took Gideon's hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that seemed both natural and profound. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued around them, Gideon and Sarah found a moment of relative privacy in the observation dome, now adorned with strings of small lights salvaged from abandoned buildings. I received word from our northern contacts today, Gideon said quietly. The first group has successfully crossed the boundary lands. They're beyond enforcement jurisdiction now. Sarah's face lit with joy. That's wonderful news. How many? 15, including the family with the infant. Gideon smiled at the memory of the tiny being who had spent its first months of life in their makeshift sanctuary. They send their gratitude, and they've established a new safe house on the other side, extending our network. The 18th door continues to multiply, Sarah observed. Soon there will be hundreds, thousands, eventually, Gideon agreed. Though we won't be here to see it all unfold. Sarah studied his face. You've made your decision then? Gideon nodded. The northern route will close once the autumn rains begin. If we're going to lead the next group, it needs to be soon. They had been discussing this possibility for weeks. As the network expanded, it had become clear that the most valuable contribution they could make was to establish new sanctuaries along the evacuation routes. Their knowledge and experience were needed beyond the confines of Sector 9K. Tavrin and Valnia will continue the work here, Gideon continued. Along with Kor and Bran, they're more than capable. And we'll establish the next doorway, Sarah said thoughtfully. Further north, beyond the reach of the current patrols. It won't be easy, Gideon cautioned. We'll be starting from nothing again. Sarah smiled, a hint of her old determination shining through. Not nothing, Gideon. We'll have each other, and we'll have what we've learned. That one open door can change everything. The celebration continued long into the night, a rare moment of joy and communion in lives that had known too much hardship. As it gradually wound down, Gideon found himself approached by an unexpected visitor, one of the newest arrivals, an elderly human man who had been rescued from a collapsed building in Sector 6J. Officer Reeves, the man addressed him, using his old title. I hope we might speak privately. Wary but curious, Gideon led the man to a quieter corner. How do you know my former title? Because we've met before, the man replied. Though you wouldn't remember. I was one of thousands whose applications crossed your desk. Gideon tensed, preparing himself for recrimination. You were denied sanctuary? No, the man said, surprising him. Approved. One of the last before the act changed everything. My wife was Centaurian, quarter alien, like many claim to be. But in her case, it was true. Your approval allowed us safe passage when others were being turned away. I don't remember, Gideon admitted. There were so many cases. Of course you don't, the man said gently. But she remembered you. She spoke of the kind-eyed officer who treated her with dignity when others showed only suspicion. She died last winter, peacefully, in her sleep. But her last wish was that I find you. Thank you. The man reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, crystalline object, a Centaurian memory stone, used in their death rituals to preserve a final message. She would want you to have this, he said, pressing it into Gideon's palm. A reminder that even before you opened your door to Sarah, you were capable of compassion. After the man departed, Gideon stood motionless, the memory stone cool against his skin. He had focused so long on the harm he had caused, the doors he had closed, that he had forgotten those he had opened, even within a flawed system. Sarah found him there still, holding the crystal, his expression one of complex emotion. What is it? She asked gently. A reminder, Gideon replied, his voice thick. That redemption isn't a single act or moment. It's a continuing choice. He told her of the man's visit, of the wife he had unknowingly helped, of the unexpected gift of memory and recognition. You see, Sarah said when he had finished, the 18th door wasn't the beginning of your journey, Gideon. It was simply when you recognized the path you were already walking. She took his hand, the one holding the crystal, and closed her fingers around his. Each door we open changes us as much as those who pass through it. That's the true gift of compassion. It transforms both the giver and receiver. As they stood together in the glow of celebration, the memory stone caught the light, refracting it into prismatic patterns that danced across their joined hands. It seemed a fitting symbol for their unexpected journey. Two beings from different worlds, brought together by circumstance, now bound by choice and purpose. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. Maps were studied, routes planned, supplies gathered. 23 refugees would join them on the northern journey, a mix of species, ages, and backgrounds, all seeking the safety of the boundary lands. On the morning of their departure, the entire community gathered in the maintenance station's main chamber for a farewell ceremony. Tavrun, now officially the leader of the Sector 9K sanctuary, stood before the symbolic doorframe where their community bond had been formalized. Today we send forth our founders to establish new sanctuaries, new open doors for those in need, he announced, his voice carrying the same formal tone he had used in their first ceremony. Though they leave our immediate circle, they remain connected to us through the network of compassion and purpose we have built together. Vailnia stepped forward, presenting Gideon and Sarah with small tokens, carved wooden pendants in the shape of an open door, each suspended on a simple cord. To remind you of where this journey began, she explained, her once weak voice now strong and confident, and to identify you to others in the network. The farewells were emotional, but not sorrowful. This was not an ending, but an expansion, the natural evolution of what they had built together. As Gideon and Sarah led their group toward the northern exit, the community lined the passage, offering words of encouragement and gratitude. At the final checkpoint, before emerging from the safety of the maintenance station, Bryn and Core waited to provide last-minute intelligence on patrol patterns. The way should be clear for the next 6 hours, Core informed them. We've arranged diversions at key checkpoints. Remember, stick to the old subway tunnels until you reach the outskirts, Bryn added. We've marked safe houses along the route. The two former detention center employees had become invaluable members of the resistance, their intimate knowledge of enforcement procedures saving countless lives. Now they clasped hands with Gideon and Sarah in a gesture of solidarity and farewell. "Watch for our signals," Gideon reminded them. "Once we've established the northern station, we'll send word." With final embraces and words of encouragement, they parted. Gideon and Sarah led their group through the northern passage and into the uncertain journey ahead. The path would be dangerous, the outcome uncertain, but they moved forward with determination born of shared purpose. The journey north took 17 days. They traveled primarily at night, navigating through abandoned tunnels, derelict industrial zones, and occasionally the thick forest that had reclaimed the areas between deteriorating urban centers. Each day brought new challenges, patrols to evade, terrain to overcome, weather to endure. Yet for every obstacle, there seemed to appear an unexpected ally, a reclusive hermit offering temporary shelter, a former transport worker guiding them through unmapped passages, even once an enforcement officer who looked the other way when their paths crossed. The network was larger than they had realized, composed not just of formal safe houses, but countless individuals making small choices of compassion when a moment demanded. On the 18th day, they reached their destination, an abandoned research station nestled in the foothills of the northern mountains. It had once housed scientists studying the unique geological formations of the region, but had been evacuated during the economic collapse that preceded the Great Elevation. Now it stood empty, hidden from casual observation by the surrounding forest, yet structurally sound enough to provide genuine shelter. "This is it," Gideon announced to the weary travelers. "Our new sanctuary." The station was dusty but intact, its solar power systems easily reactivated, its water filtration equipment still functional. Within days, they had transformed it from an abandoned relic to a livable space. Not comfortable by pre-collapse standards, but luxurious compared to the conditions many had endured in recent years. From this base, they established contact with the network on both sides, the sanctuary they had left behind in Sector 9K and the new outpost beyond the boundary lands. They were the crucial middle link in an expanding chain of safety and passage. 3 months into their operation of the northern station, as summer reached its peak in the mountain foothills, Sarah and Gideon stood outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues. They had just received word that another group had successfully crossed the boundary lands. 57 souls now beyond the reach of enforcement authorities. "Sometimes I wonder what's happening in the upper city," Gideon mused. "If they've noticed the exodus from below. If it's making any difference to their policies." "Change often begins at the margins," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "In the places power ignores until it's too late. Perhaps what we're doing here will eventually force recognition, even reformation. Or perhaps we're just helping people survive until something breaks the current system," Gideon countered. "Either way, it matters." Sarah nodded, leaning slightly against his shoulder, a gesture of affection that had become natural between them over the months of shared purpose and proximity. "It matters," she agreed. "Door by door, life by life." As darkness fell, they remained outside, watching as stars appeared in the clear mountain sky. Sarah pointed to a particular cluster, barely visible to human eyes. "There," she said softly. "My home system. From this northern vantage, it's just visible on clear nights." Gideon squinted, trying to see what was so evident to her. "Do you miss it?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I miss what it was before the destruction. The colors of our twin moons at dusk, the sound of the phosphorescent forests at night. But home is not merely place. It is connection, purpose, belonging." She turned to face him. "I have found those things here, with you, with our work." The moment between them deepened, heavy with unspoken emotion. Their relationship had evolved gradually, naturally, from reluctant allies to trusted partners to something more profound, something neither had anticipated but both now recognized as essential to their shared journey. "Sarah," Gideon began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I never imagined when I opened my door that night." He was interrupted by an urgent signal from inside the station. 3 short pulses of light, their code for approaching visitors. Immediately alert, they hurried inside to the monitoring station where their communication specialist, a young human woman named Eli, was receiving an encoded transmission. Large group incoming, she reported tensely. 40 plus, moving fast. They triggered our perimeter sensors 10 minutes ago. Enforcement, Gideon asked, already reaching for the emergency protocols they had established. No, Eli replied, sounding puzzled. The recognition codes are valid. They're from the network. But we weren't expecting any arrivals, and certainly not a group this size. Prepare for emergency intake, Sarah decided quickly. Alert the medical team. Activate the secondary shelters. Inventory our supplies. The station burst into organized activity, each person falling into their assigned emergency roles with practiced efficiency. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to receive whoever approached, allies or potential threats. When the group finally arrived, led by a familiar figure, one of Core's trusted runners, the reason for their unexpected appearance became clear. These weren't ordinary refugees, but enforcement officers and their families, people who had been part of the system but could no longer stomach its increasingly brutal policies. There's been a purge, explained the leader, a former captain named Ellis. Anyone suspected of sympathy toward aliens or showing reluctance to enforce the new detention protocols is being removed. Many are being detained themselves. We had warning just hours before they came for us. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, added another officer, a woman whose uniform still bore the insignia of the Bureau's intelligence division. The government is losing control of the narrative. Too many people have disappeared into the detention system, too many families separated. Questions are being asked, even in the upper city. They're responding with increased repression, Ellis continued grimly. But it's having the opposite effect. For every officer they purge, 3 more begin questioning orders. For every family they detain, 10 more hear about it and become sympathetic to the resistance. As they provided food, medical attention, and rest facilities to the newcomers, Gideon and Sarah absorbed the implications of this development. What had begun as a small, desperate act of compassion, opening a door to a freezing alien, had expanded into a movement with consequences that were now reaching the highest levels of authority. Later that night, after the immediate needs of their unexpected guests had been addressed, Gideon and Sarah retreated to the station's observation platform to process what they had learned. It's happening faster than we anticipated, Gideon observed. The system is beginning to fracture from within. Systems built on cruelty and exclusion always contain the seeds of their own collapse, Sarah replied. What surprises me is not that it's happening, but that our small actions could help catalyze it. Gideon shook his head in wonder. 18 doors. That's how this began. 17 closed, 1 opened. And now hundreds open across the sectors, Sarah added. Each one changing lives, changing hearts, eventually changing the very structures of power. As they stood together beneath the vast canopy of stars, some familiar to human eyes, others visible only to Sarah's alien perception, the distance between their worlds seemed both immense and insignificant. They had come from different planets, different traditions, different species. Yet they had found in each other not merely allies, but kindred spirits united by a shared vision of what might be possible if people simply chose to open doors rather than close them. What you were saying earlier, Sarah said softly, before we were interrupted. What never imagined? Gideon turned to her, his expression open and unguarded in a way it had rarely been before their shared journey. I never imagined that in trying to save you, I would end up saving myself. That in opening my door to a stranger, I would find home. The word held all the meaning they had discovered together. Safety, purpose, belonging, love. Sarah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining as they had done so many times before, yet this time with new significance. Among my people, she said, there's a belief that souls recognize each other across lifetimes, across worlds. That certain connections transcend the physical boundaries that separate us. Is that what happened with us? Gideon asked. Soul recognition? Sarah smiled, the natural luminescence of her skin brightening subtly in the darkness. I prefer to think it was simpler than that. Two beings in need found each other at exactly the right moment. One knocked, one opened. And in that opening, everything changed. Their conversation was interrupted by a signal from below. Not the emergency alert this time, but a gentler summons. They descended to find Ellis and several of the other former officers gathered around the communication station. We've just received word from our contacts still inside the system, Ellis announced without preamble. The government is planning something unprecedented, a mass deportation of all detained aliens, scheduled to begin next week. They're calling it the final resolution. The news sent a chill through the room. Numbers? Gideon asked tersely. Thousands, Ellis replied grimly, including many who have been in detention for years. They're consolidating them at central processing for off-world transport. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. Then we must consolidate as well. All safe houses, all stations, all resources focused on one objective, preventing this deportation. It's impossible, one of the officers objected. Central processing is the most secure facility in the region. We need an army. We have something better than an army, Gideon interrupted. We have a network. People in every sector, at every level, connected by a common purpose. He turned to Ellis. How many officers would resist direct orders if they knew what was at stake? More than you might think, Ellis replied thoughtfully, especially among those who work directly with the detainees. The brutality of the system has been wearing on people's conscience. Through the night, they planned. Messages were sent to every node in their expanding network, from the original sanctuary in Sector 9K to the outpost beyond the boundary lands, from sympathetic workers in the upper city to reclusive hermits in the abandoned sectors. Each had a role to play in what would be their most ambitious and dangerous operation yet. For 7 days, they prepared. Supplies were gathered, routes secured, roles assigned. Former enforcement officers provided critical intelligence on security protocols and facility layouts. Medical teams prepared for potential casualties. Communication channels were established and secured. On the eve of the operation, Gideon found Sarah alone in their quarters, meditating in the manner of her people, seated cross-legged, palms upward, eyes closed but with a soft luminescence pulsing beneath her eyelids. He waited quietly until she completed her ritual and opened her eyes. Am I interrupting? Not at all, she assured him. I was just finishing. Pre-mission traditions? Sarah nodded. A practice of centering before action, of finding clarity amidst complexity. She studied his face. You're concerned about tomorrow. Terrified might be more accurate, Gideon admitted. We're attempting something unprecedented with extremely high stakes. And you fear failure. I fear the cost of failure, he corrected. Not just for us, but for thousands waiting in detention, believing help will come. Sarah rose gracefully, moving to stand before him. Do you remember what I told you that night in your house, when I was still weak from the cold? About my people saying, even in the void between stars, hope finds purchase, Gideon recalled. Yes. Sarah placed her hands on his shoulders, her silver eyes holding his gaze. Tomorrow, many will find their hope in us. But we must find ours in each other, in the network we've built, in the doors we've opened, and the paths we've created. Gideon placed his hands over hers. When did you become so wise? A smile touched her lips. I've always been wise, Gideon. You just needed time to notice. The lightness of the moment eased some of the tension he had been carrying. Whatever happened tomorrow, they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that snowy night when a desperate knock had met an unexpected opening. Dawn arrived with a clarity that seemed both blessing and omen. No storms to provide cover, but no impediments to movement either. The operation began with a precision born of careful planning and desperate necessity. From every sector, members of their network converged on carefully designated points, each group unaware of the others, yet all moving in coordinated harmony toward a common objective. Gideon and Sarah led the team assigned to the most critical task, gaining access to Central Processing's main control systems. With them were Ellis and 5 other former officers intimately familiar with the facility's layout and protocols. They moved through service tunnels long forgotten by current security personnel, navigated maintenance shafts that didn't appear on official schematics, and utilized identification codes that hadn't yet been purged from the system. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the facility that had been the source of so much suffering. "Security, checkpoint ahead," Ellis whispered as they approached a junction. "Two guards, standard protocol." Gideon glanced at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Their plan didn't involve violence, not just from moral principle, but practical necessity. Any alarm would doom their mission before it began. Instead, they employed a method Sarah's people had perfected, a harmless aerosol compound that induced brief disorientation and short-term memory disruption. As Ellis created a diversion from one direction, Sarah released the compound from another, the colorless, odorless mist taking effect almost immediately. The guards slumped in their chairs, conscious but confused, their attention scattered and unfocused. "They'll recover fully in 30 minutes, Sarah assured the team as they moved past, with no memory of our passage. For more checkpoints, each navigated with similar nonviolent tactics. Then they reached their objective, the Environmental Control Center that regulated conditions throughout the facility. It was from here that the accidental failures occurred, the ones that resulted in alien detainees perishing from unsuitable atmospheres, temperature extremes, or toxic gas mixtures. It was also from here that they would execute the first phase of their plan. Ellis quickly gained access to the main control panel, his former clearance still active. "They haven't updated the security protocols," he observed with grim satisfaction. "Bureaucratic oversight works in our favor for once." Working with practiced efficiency, he initiated a facility-wide environmental recalibration, a standard procedure typically performed during low-occupancy periods. Except this recalibration included a carefully designed modification: the introduction of Sarah's memory-disrupting compound into all administrative areas. Dispersion beginning, Ellis confirmed as lights on the panel shifted from red to green. Security and administrative personnel will experience gradual disorientation over the next 20 minutes. Nothing harmful, but enough to create significant confusion. While Ellis monitored the environmental systems, Gideon and Sarah accessed a secondary control station that managed the facility's communication networks. Here, they executed the second phase, broadcasting a pre-recorded message to each detainee's section, providing specific instructions for the coordinated evacuation to follow. "Message transmitting," Sarah confirmed, "section by section, in the sequence we established." The third phase required precise timing. As the compound took effect among the facility staff, creating a cascade of minor errors and communication breakdowns, teams positioned throughout the lower sectors would initiate controlled infrastructure disruptions, power fluctuations, transportation system glitches, communication interference. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to divert resources and attention away from central processing. "Confirmation signals coming in," Gideon reported, watching indicators on his portable receiver. Phase 3 initiating on schedule. The final and most crucial phase depended entirely on human choice, on the individual decisions of those enforcement officers who had been wavering in their loyalty to a system they increasingly recognized as unjust. Ellis had identified key personnel in critical positions, people known to harbor doubts, who had expressed concerns privately, who had small acts of mercy on their records. To each, a message had been sent containing a simple question: "When a moment comes, which side of the door will you choose?" Now that moment had arrived, as alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Not from their actions, but from the growing confusion among the staff. They watched the monitoring screens with tense anticipation. Would enough officers make the right choice? Would access doors be left unlocked, security protocols overlooked, evacuation routes cleared? The answer came not in dramatic declarations or heroic stands, but in a series of small, seemingly insignificant actions. A security officer forgetting to relock a section door after checking on a disturbance. A transport coordinator accidentally scheduling extra vehicles for a routine shift change. A medical supervisor ordering an emergency evacuation drill for the alien detention wings. Dozens of such choices, made by individuals who would never meet, never know each other's names, yet were connected by a common recognition that some orders should not be followed, some doors should not remain closed. As the facility descended into choreographed chaos, Sarah turned to Gideon, her expression both fierce and tender. "It's working," she said simply. "The doors are opening." Through their secure communication channel came reports from around the facility, detainees moving through previously secured areas, guided by resistance members who had infiltrated as maintenance workers or low-level staff. Transport vehicles arriving at designated collection points, ready to disperse their passengers to safe houses throughout the network. Medical teams treating those too weak to travel unassisted. First group confirmed evacuated. Ellis reported, his professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine emotion. Second and third groups in transit. No casualties reported. The operation continued through the day and into the night, far more successful than even their most optimistic projections. By dawn of the following day, central processing, the crown jewel of the enforcement system, the physical embodiment of the government's anti-alien policies, stood largely empty, its detainee sections abandoned, its purpose defeated not by violence or force, but by a network of open doors. As they regrouped at a designated safe house in Sector 8J, exhausted but exhilarated, the full scope of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Preliminary counts suggested nearly 3,000 detainees had been evacuated. Aliens of various species, humans with alien connections, political dissidents who had opposed the government's policies. "Where will they all go?" someone asked during their debriefing session. "Everywhere," Sarah replied simply. "Some to the boundary lands and beyond. Others to new safe houses being established across all sectors. Many to communities that have been preparing for this moment for months. The network is larger than any of us realized," Gideon added. "What began as one open door has multiplied beyond counting." As the debriefing concluded and teams dispersed to continue their work, Gideon and Sarah found themselves alone in the safe house's small garden, a rare patch of green in the otherwise industrial landscape of the lower sectors. What happens now? Gideon wondered aloud. The government won't simply accept this defeat. There will be investigations, reprisals. Undoubtedly, Sarah agreed. But they will be fighting shadows, a resistance with no headquarters, no leader to capture, no central point of failure. Just countless individuals making the choice to open doors rather than close them. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining in the gesture that had become so natural between them. "And we will continue as we began, one door, one life, one moment at a time." Gideon looked at their joined hands, one human, one alien, yet fitting together as though designed for each other. "I Neve,"